You're tuned into the Unnecessary Harm podcast, where we drill down on issues of substance use and its cultural impact. Your host, Shane Varcoe, Executive Director of the Delgado Institute, with over 40 years experience in youth and community work and a passion for building resilience.
Welcome back to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. It's great to have you with us again. And for those chiming in for the first time, welcome on board. I know there's a few new subscribers and certainly there'll be some new viewers and listeners today with our guest. So to get into that, today's guest has spent nearly 4 decades at the forefront of addiction neuroscience and taken that science directly into the White House. She is a professor of psychobiology at Harvard Medical School, where she directs the McLean Hospital Laboratory of Addiction Biology. Her groundbreaking research revolutionized brain imaging for Parkinson's disease and clarified how drugs hijack the brain's reward systems. But she didn't just stay in the lab. As Deputy Director for Demand Reduction in the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, she developed the federal and now globally recognized SBIRT program, which is Screening, Brief Intervention and Referral to Treatment program, proving that early screening and intervention can dramatically reduce substance use before it becomes a crisis. That's a big deal, and I've been following this for quite a while, actually. The President appointed her to the Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and the Opioid Crisis, where she authored the final report. With over 200 scientific publications, 46 patents, and decades shaping policy at the highest level, she brings the evidence we desperately need to this conversation on substance use. Dr. Bertha Madras, and Professor, I might add, welcome to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Good to have you here.
It's a delight to be here and to be down under, even though it's virtual.
Fantastic. Yes, Louis, as I said before, we've had Bertha and I have met on a couple of occasions, but very superficially. So it's really, really good to have you here and have a serious and significant conversation around the issues that we address here on the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Obviously, it's a broad church in one sense. There's a lot of subject matter we can engage in. But I'm really glad you're with us because there's a couple of really key issues I want to sort of drill down into with you today. And I think our listeners are going to be in for a real treat because we're going to be hard-pressed to find someone better. I'm going to say a bit better. I'm sure there's some peers in your space in this particular arena of neuroscience. And so I'm really, really excited about this. So to kick us off, though, Bertha, all those decades ago, what was the catalyst that kind of got you into this space? I mean, you're leaving, I don't know, you're a teenager, you're leaving school, you're going to university, I'm going to be this. Or what was the catalyst? What was the driver behind you entering into this particular arena?
The initial catalyst, thank you for that question, because it's a very heartfelt response. I was a young kid in college and university. I was 16 years old, and
Wow.
I had been accepted into the honors biochemistry program. And one of our professors said, as part of this course, you have to present a written paper to the class on a topic, and I give you 10 topics. And she presented us with 10, and none of them excited me. And so I went to her and I said, is it possible for me to find something that I really think would be interesting? And she said, of course. And I latched on to phenylketonuria, which is an inborn error of metabolism, in which if you understand what metabolites do and how they can damage the brain, and you catch it within a few weeks of birth, you can prevent a child from developing the most serious brain disease.
Wow. Okay.
I was fascinated by that. And I said to myself, if you can actually change the course of a child's life by understanding the brain, then this is something I developed enormous passion. And I began to work in neuroscience. I studied epilepsy. I worked on drugs that affect the brain of people who harbor schizophrenia. And then one day it dawned on me that there are so many diseases of the brain for which we don't know the origin, and we cannot help it. All we can do is treat. But there's one class of disorders that we can prevent 100%,
Yeah.
and we can stop, we can intervene, and we can treat. And I said, that is substance use disorders.
Perfect.
And that's how it began.
Well, that's staggering. I was not aware of that. That's why the question. I thought that wasn't one of those questions that I had an answer to, but I thought it was something that helps our listeners get a bit of a handle on how you tick. But at 16, I just want us to get our heads around that, guys. I mean, those listening, the 16-year-old, obviously very bright, very clever, is given a series of options, and I'm reiterating for good purpose here. It chooses another option that sets in motion not only her own career, but her own focus, her own mission, if you like, but that of a whole scientific discipline. And I think I'm going to put that emphasis on that, Bertha. I think that's just remarkable. And for those listening out there, we have some younger cohort that do chime in. That's just inspirational. And I just think that's something that step outside the box. I think that's a lesson I'm hearing for me personally.
Yes.
Step outside the box. Have a go.
There's actually, and I still have the paper that I wrote in my, in days when you didn't have computers. So every mistake I made, which was done on carbon copies, I had to erase by hand.
Yep. I'm going to betray myself too. I'm fully aware of those days. And I'm at my old typewriters. I think there's one still somewhere in the basement somewhere. But look,
but I'd love to finish the loop on this story, because there's actually a dramatic coda to it, which I think is brought deep, profound tears of joy and sadness to my heart. There was a gentleman at Harvard, long before I ever came there, who was urging all states to adopt this test for newborns, the phenylketonuria test, so that children would avoid developing this problem. And I was on a committee to give him a professorial title.
Wow.
He was much older than I was. And when I read his curriculum vitae, I was in tears, because I realized that this modest man had not yet been promoted.
Oh, wow.
And he was promoted at that time.
And you were part of that process. That's a wonderful bookend. No, that's a wonderful bookend, Bertha. Thank you for that. No, yeah, that's kind of like, wow, it's inspirational, isn't it? It's really inspirational. Okay, good, excellent. Look, the Delgado Institute, we've been around a long, long time, in various iterations, of course, over many, many decades. We've got 150 years of history in the country here. And as you can imagine, crystal meth wasn't around 150 years ago, but certainly alcohol's been problematic for all those times. But we've been fighting actively since I've been involved in this historical institution. We've been fighting actively the war against the war for drugs. Now, we're the bad guys, the bad actors continue to talk about the war on drugs has failed, but we've seen, particularly in the last decade, a war for drugs escalate. And it's just been, really quite clear. And we've called it out for what it is, and we've named it, and we know colleagues and the world have now chimed into that kind of narrative as well. We're obviously passionate about protecting young people and their families and their communities. That's our driver. We're essentially primarily a demand reduction and prevention focused organisation, but we also work closely with the recovery alumni, particularly for retasking them in prevention frameworks. So that's a real key issue for us, but I won't get into that today. But I know this is a passion of yours, and clearly you've just outlined that in that original paper. But let's start with an easy question, a really easy question. Just what kind of wrecking ball are substances to the developing brain, Dr. Madras?
Well, there are two age groups that have the most vulnerability. One are developing fetuses, and one are adolescents. And what do we know about adolescents? The earlier you begin to use drugs, the much more likely you are to develop an addiction to them. That's clear as a bell. It's been shown for alcohol, it's been shown for nicotine, opioids, marijuana, cocaine, MDMA, even MDMA, ecstasy, which is considered not that addictive in adults, it certainly is for young teens, as well as amphetamine and methamphetamines.
Of course.
So that's number one. Number two is that the younger you begin using drugs, the far greater risk an adolescent has to derail their potential, because it interferes with learning and memory, it interferes with academic achievement. The drugs interfere with goal-directed behaviors and motivation. And what is probably the most intriguing, but doesn't have a lot of science behind it, is that it can cause an arrested development. So that a child who begins using at 12, 14, 15 and develops into a daily user and with an addiction, by the time they're 40 or 50, they may have not gone through all the developmental stages that people who haven't resorted to substances do. Now, with regard to individual drugs, they all have different effects.
Of course.
Addiction is the common denominator for most of them, but they all have different risks. They all have definitely different consequences. And we have to recognize that we can't weigh this drug is the worst, this drug is better. Everything depends on how that drug interacts with that individual.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's one of it's the Russian roulette dynamic of substance use. You've got, even in the adult space, you've got people that are considered functional drug users, which is it's a myth. But it looks good on paper, and people can masquerade well. And we talk about imposter syndrome. It's probably best applied to the adult drug user who functions. They pay their taxes, they go to work, but they're actually, so I'm okay. So their brains aren't as messed up, or their psychosocial framework is as messed up. But it's interesting you talk about that arrested development thing, because we've done some research, and you're probably privy to more data than we are on this, but because we do a lot of seminars in schools and with parents and families and sporting clubs and produce various curriculum in that space. But what we found was, and I mean, I'm going to use this language carefully here because I'm talking to an absolute expert, so I don't want to blow myself up here. But you talked about the arrested development dynamic. It's very interesting because they talk about and the language they used from a lay perspective was like a nuclear device. A 14-year-old uses a high-end stimulant like crystal meth. It's like a nuclear device going off in their cell, not just their brains, but in each cell. And that actually does this kind of, it's such a wow moment, that almost, it's like a searing of that particular moment. Mm-hmm. And so that 14-year-old, and we've worked this through with various counsellors and various 12-step programs and CBD programs, and they find that you've got a 35-year-old, highly intelligent, functional adult who's got an addiction problem, and when you push the right buttons, they begin to manifest the behaviour of a bratty 14-year-old. Like it's like this complete flip. And then they ask the question, so when did you first use? I was 14. And so there's this kind of this, now, as you said, the science behind this is still young, but this kind of dynamic, and when you have that in place, and then you have this overlay of the cognitive development, which can be arrested as well, of course, as you've mentioned. But if you can master that, you still have this emotional capture where this person is stuck because they haven't gone through the stages of, delayed gratification. Then they spend more of their time externalizing blame, and all these kind of things that they've never learned properly to deal with because they've always been engaged in substance use. So, that's a really fascinating thing because that's also that behavioral dynamic that influences the environments that young people find themselves in and adults find themselves in, which create levels of dysfunction that also seek often self-medication because people go, I can't cope with this.
Well, there are two things to add to your overview, which I think is very critical. One is that the adolescent brain development, adolescent brain cognitive development study, ABCD, is a longitudinal study that has been sponsored by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And they have recruited over 12,000 young people and they're trying to follow them from about the age of 9 onwards for decades if funding continues.
Yeah.
And I think that study is going to help us really nail the science with regard to their psychosocial behavior.
Yeah.
Of the ones who succumb to using drugs at an early age, they will see what happens to them over the course of 10 years or 15 years. I think the Dunedin study that Madeline Meyer summarized from New Zealand is an excellent example of a longitudinal study. We need more of those. The ABCD study, they're actually having a meeting in December, the 2nd in San Diego, and I think that's going to be a very interesting one to follow in terms of what their findings are thus far. There have been a few publications that are riveting.
Yes.
In terms of consequences, especially prenatal, because the 9-year-olds, they're now about 12, 15, it's still premature to conclude what they will be like as adults.
Of course.
But the second point is that I once took a Harvard Medical School student class to a detox and treatment center in Boston, in the Boston area. And there was a man in his 40s who was there because he had been brought there against his will for detoxification from opioids. He was very dapper, very sophisticated, dressed in a beautiful suit when he met us because he wanted to look his best.
Of course.
And when we asked him what gives him great pleasure in life, he says, the great pleasure that I have is teaching young people how to use needles.
Yeah. Wow.
And how to inject so that they find the right vein without pain. And all of us, in all the students and I were just pondering, what mentality is that?
Yeah.
It sounded like a 13-year-old kid trying to teach his friends how to throw a baseball or how to kick a football.
Yep. Interesting you brought that up, because that kind of leads into the next part of our conversation that it's on my notes here. It's interesting. There's a quote, and it's an abbreviated one of yours. And we use it. It's in play and part of our literature and our platforms. And you'll know the quote, of course. This is not about a war on drugs. This is about a defense of our brains, the repository of our humanity. That's the pre-seed version. And I want to tag off that particular vignette you just shared and ask you, to get your academic and your certainly incredibly long and intricate involvement in this arena of dealing with the addicted, dealing with the dependent. As a global academic leader in both science and policy, what is your, it's a big question, what is your take on this war for drugs? And using that example from that gentleman, and what do you think of the perspective, from your perspective, what are the drivers for this war for drugs? Like, this gentleman is an advocate for the war for drugs. I want to teach young people how to do this. What do you think of some of in your experience, a long experience of engaging in all these areas, what do you think are the key drivers there, Bertha?
Well, the key driver for that quote is that the brain is the repository of our humanity. It is what enables us to do these wondrous things. And drugs can simply compromise or derail every motivation we have. I think that because we as a society have developed so much wealth, so much comfort, so much ease, so little pain, by that I mean the pain of backbreaking work, of coal mining, of farming, of building with our hands, of washing clothes in a riverbed, that there is a lot of leisure time and boredom because there are very few stressors that force us to work hard and to develop goals and dreams among some people. And I think the resorting to drugs as a way of getting an artificial high, a confidence trick that's played on your mind, is probably the trade-off that our society has because of its wealth and riches. People say, well, poverty drives drug use. It does not. In so many areas of the world, poor people who work extremely hard every day in labor-intensive areas don't resort to drugs because they feel that they have to be competent to be able to feed their families, to be able to prepare food, to be able to survive. We've removed almost all the stressors of survival, and some people really believe that drugs presents itself with the safest, quickest, cheapest way to feel good about themselves.
Correct.
Rather than having to strive like our ancestors did.
I hear that. It's interesting you say that. We, the Delgado Institute, in its education platform, again, there's a lot of nuances in this and various, sidebars in these definitions, but 4 categories that we identified for uptake are obviously we call relentless pain. Now, that's probably the only, I use the word carefully, legitimate driver for engagement in drug use. Trauma, serious trauma, not the paper cut type of trauma, the serious trauma that people want to self-medicate. They just want that. I get that. I totally understand that, and we talk about that. In our country, 7 to 10% of people who engage in substances do so for that reason. The second one is relational poverty. The reason I'm bringing these up because the last one you just talked about, I'm going to talk about in a moment. Relational poverty, social isolation, is creating a huge disconnect in our psyche, and that's not just loneliness, but a sense of connectedness is a big driver as well. The third one is, you've just nailed it, recalcitrant hedonism. It's kind of like, I just want to have fun, party hard, do whatever. I've got the means, I've got the capacity, I've got the healthcare system to back me up if things go pear-shaped, let's have fun. But then the last one, which is the big one you just touched on, is we call residing absurdity. In other words, this deep sense of meaninglessness, in purposelessness in a person's existence. And it's interesting that the word high, right, people are getting high, and you nailed it when you said it's a fake form of engaging in the transcendent, the term high. We want to go beyond where we are, and we want to have something, a purpose that's higher and more important than who we are, and we invest in that. But if we got a shortcut, which the bad actors are constantly peddling, and now we're seeing it even in the developing nations where we work closely with, I was in Africa actually 2 weeks ago, where they're starting to push drugs into that space. So this becomes an option where the hardworking, you're right, the hardworking poor, genuine poor, are in slums, but they're working hard, but they're also being told that, you know what, it's tough. The vicissitudes of life are too many. Here, take this, take that. You'll be fine. Yeah. You'll be okay. Just let it wash away for a while. Come back tomorrow. And, of course, that's another layer of dysfunction on an already broken culture. So, I think those who are listening today, you've just heard from one of the world's leading academics in this space, folks. So take notice. This is really, really important. There is a whole lot of factors here, but that sense of purpose and meaning are important. Yes, Bertha, go.
Well, I think that, there are many, many experts in our country on the social determinants of drug use. And, of course, they list them all as poverty and racism but very few people actually drill down to the fact that most of the people who are deeply disappointed and profoundly depressed and willing to resort to drugs, it stems from poor family dynamics.
Yep.
We have to nail I have often interrupted some of these presentations with my hand, and I've said, what about the family? Where is the family support, the family love, the family treasuring of children, of their relationships?
Beautiful.
And if those fall apart, that's probably the most profound social determinant of drug use I think that exists. All the others are very impartial. It's like Prime Minister Macmillan of England was once asked, what keeps you awake at night? The worry of nuclear war? He said, no. It's if I have a fight with my wife. And
Wow.
it's the same mentality. People really, I think the family is the heart and soul of a person's outlook on life. Of course, there are many other factors, and you've enumerated some of them. I won't get into all of the lists of the risk factors. There are over 100 of them. Over 100 risk factors that will promote drug use amongst people. And there are protective factors. But I think if the family is strong, the protective factors could surmount a lot of the difficulties and demons that people sense. And
Absolutely.
I certainly agree that the remoteness we now have, where we resort to looking at this thing, these kids day and night, and not developing relationships and ignoring families is another major, that's the most modern problem of all, but that certainly is one of the issues.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, the 100 protective factors, because it's interesting, the ACE, the 7 or the 9, if you like, 7, 9 ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, they all pivot, it's interesting, all of them pivot around the substance use. They affect all the other ones: neglect, abuse, and family household dysfunction. The 3 genres in there. It's interesting that those when the family is broken down, and we actually have a quote. It says, "Resilient communities don't use drugs. Resilient families don't want them." And it's when people feel connected, they, as you've just beautifully articulated, they're loved, they're nurtured. There's a genuine special future visualized for the child. They are structured, they are disciplined, they are coached, they are embraced, they are loved on. When those things happen, substances just don't figure into that setting. Other than what you said, where we become bored or peer pressure and we want to fit in or whatever else may be a driver. But even then, those factors don't have the weight because of that profound connection in that family. And I think, again, those listening, we're talking to one of the world's leading neuroscientists here, people. It's all getting back to the basics. It all revolves around these things, guys. So just pay attention. Now, I want to just pivot across to weed, because I know that's been on your plate in the last probably 18 months, 2 years, particularly. We all know we've had many podcasts on this and chats about this. It's not the harmless, the drug that's been purported by the previous generations, but it's such a highly engineered plant now. We've argued in the marketplace, both in public settings as well as in schools. We've said, you know what, guys, the weed that nature or God created doesn't exist anywhere on the planet. If a white man's been there, it's gone. So it doesn't exist. So this is one of the most engineered drugs. I won't even call it a plant anymore. It's so barbarically engineered. It's incredibly toxic. We know what it does. It's shocking. The potency levels are through the roof. We're not going to revisit all that because, again, we've had a lot of podcasts on this. But if I remember correctly from the research, again, please correct me on this. I haven't got the data right in front of me, but there was a paper released by again, Bertha, please help me out, NCBM, that's National, one of your big ones over there.
NISDA, National Survey on Drug Use and Health.
One of the big ones, anyway. Yes. And I should have written this down. I knew I'd get caught out on this. But anyway, they were actually doing a race. Yeah, it's on me, people. Sorry. I failed on this one. But there was a research done about comparing substances that transition a person, or the potential, to transition a person from a temporary psychotic experience into a more permanent or more residing psychosis. And they named crystal meth, they named LSD, they named opioids, and all these had a rating. But the one that doubled even that of LSD
was marijuana.
Was high-end THC cannabis.
Yes.
So talk us through that. What are you seeing, how that's playing out in your orbit?
Well, the problem with there's several papers now. The most interesting ones are that if you show up in an emergency department with a psychosis related to the fact that you've recently used potent marijuana, the probability of that psychosis converting to schizophrenia hovers between 35 and 50%.
Wow.
And schizophrenia is a lifelong disorder, disease. It is a very difficult one to treat. It is a very difficult one to live with. And for those who don't know what psychosis and schizophrenia is, it's essentially a combination of thought disorder, paranoia, flat affect. Some people function beautifully under medications. They maintain a high IQ. They do extremely well, but many people don't. And it is lifelong. In most cases, it's irreversible. In some cases, in a minority of cases, it does wane over time. So the real question that has come forth with regard to schizophrenia and marijuana is that people have denied the connection. They say that it's not causality, it's correlation.
Yes, that's a wonderful line, isn't it?
It's a wonderful line. And one of the ways they've constructed the argument is to say that because people are more prone to using marijuana, they are probably the ones who are going to develop it anyway. But here is the killer to that argument. There are what's called the Bradford Hill criteria for correlation versus causation.
I've heard this, yep.
And there is a dose-response function. That's one of the criteria. The more you use, the more likely you will develop. It's the same with cigarette smoking. The more you use, the more likely you are at high risk for developing lung cancer and cardiovascular disease. The fact that these correlations have been found in 7 different countries, and now it's even more than that. Yeah. So it doesn't depend on one little culture, one society, one small subpopulation. The fact that the earlier age of onset of use gives rise to a much higher risk. I can go on and show you. And right now, after looking at all these criteria, I find more and more psychiatrists who are willing to accept the fact that it's a component cause.
Wow.
Not a correlation, but a component cause of schizophrenia.
Did you hear that,
and
people?
The other thing that I've heard every argument against it. So I'm very, very conversant and fighting against those arguments. But one of them is, it as I said, it would have happened anyway. No, we do not think it would have happened anyway, especially because in certain large databases like the Danish one, there is evidence that if people did not smoke and become addicted to marijuana, they would have reduced the number of cases of schizophrenia by around 25 to 30% higher in males than females.
Yeah, of course. That's significant.
That is very significant. And the other interesting thing is that for people who use, this is a Canadian study by Myron et al., for people who use marijuana, the risks of developing schizophrenia after heavy use wanes the further away the further in time away from the time you stopped.
Right.
So the risk of developing it if you stopped a month ago is very, very high. But if it's years ago and you stopped using, the risks are very diminished. I can go on and on with this recent data.
Yep.
But
that's brilliant. No, please feel free.
The other thing is that there are more and more cases of young people entering the emergency departments with psychosis due to their use of marijuana than ever before. And the question is, are there more kids showing up with psychosis? Yes. How could it possibly be that they're all predisposed to having schizophrenia? From my perspective, the arguments against it are getting thinner and thinner and weaker. And if only everyone tested for marijuana, put that into the medical charts, and develop excellent statistical base for this, we would see the upward trends more readily than we're seeing them now in the United States. In other countries, they are generating the data that we are not.
That's very important. We have and I want our listeners to get this, because collecting data and collecting it in a way that it can be recorded accurately and without bias is one of the key issues, because there's some gatekeepers of policy in our country. We exported harm reduction to the world. We exported bad harm reduction, I should say, to the world. We're a cancer here in this country. We've been challenging that for a while. We believe harm reduction is a good policy and its framework to help people exit drug use, but it's been hijacked here to normalise drug use instead, not help people reduce or exit from drug use. But so there's some data capturing mechanisms, in particularly in our state. The ambulance and hospital admissions, they're now recording alcohol and other drugs. So if the patient discloses, which they are more and more happy to do because there's not a lot of consequences for using drugs in our state. So what they do is they're recording those things, and now we're seeing those, not just ambulance attendants, but hospitalisation. And marijuana is becoming more and more problematic, and they're trying to now see if that's adding to the mental health issues, because what they've done in our country, and this is what's disturbing for us, Bertha, is they've collapsed all of the drug-using data now into mental health capture. So it's all mixed together now. So when you say, oh, this person has a mental health problem, no, they have a drug problem. But they don't say that. No, they have a mental health problem. So they're hiding the data. They're hiding the impact. My brother, and the listeners who are regular to us and are aware of this, my younger brother, passed away 18 months ago, lifelong cannabis user, and he had a schizoaffective disorder because of his weed use. He was all over the shop. So I use the term schizoaffective disorder deliberately, because he was never diagnosed with schizophrenia, but it was manifesting in all those kind of ways, as you mentioned previously: disheveled thinking, massive paranoia, imaginings, and all sorts of problematic thinking. So, but he was seen as mentally ill when he was purely not mentally ill. He was a substance user that has become mentally ill. So again, we really need to, and I'm hearing what you're saying, and we really need to be far more, and I'm speaking out to the ether here, people, we need to be calling our agencies to properly account for this, instead of burying all these really toxic, disturbing behaviours and outcomes into a benign category that we think we can brush over. Whereas the opening line from Dr Madras was very powerful, that she said the thing that can be prevented from happening in her earlier studies that she did on developing and brain health, the one that can be prevented and dealt with and exited from is substance use. Yet we're doing everything we can to bury that capacity to stop this. So we know there's some bad actors behind that, but I'm now ranting, as I do every occasion. Sorry, Dr. Madras, I do this occasionally, I have a rant, but it is problematic. And we've got bad actors running the show here. So thank you for that. And I think we need to really hear what's being said here, guys. Please hear this. and be
Well,
aware of it.
here
And
is
develop an
just a couple
understanding.
more examples of.
Go.
This is from Myron again from Canada. This is Ontario.
Yes.
And new schizophrenic cases associated with cannabis use disorder. In 2006, it was 1.6%. In 2022, it's 9.6%.
Wow.
New cases. This was just published in JAMA Network Open, which is a very rigorous, very, very tough journal to get
We use
publications.
it often. Yep.
And, there's rising psychotic disorders that are, there's just publication after publication on frequency of use, potency of use, and schizophrenia. So I just feel that, as I said, a component cause of schizophrenia is something that we should embed into our public education outreach.
Perfect. That statement we need to put in blazing lights above all our medical institutions right now. Thank you for that. And thank you for letting me have my little moment there. Our listeners know I do this from time to time. So, look, as you said, the last 18 months you've been working on this this issue of cannabis and in the policy space, and you've had a recent win over there, which I think is really exciting about the hemp industry. There's been a bit of there was a shift where there's been a lot of pushback, and I think you're involved in this, weren't you? Along with Sam and other groups to try and get the
Farm Bill.
Sorry?
The Farm Bill.
The Farm Bill, the Farm Bill. And so because it was the hemp industry was being hijacked by the bad actors, and they were using converting hemp into delta 8 THC, and of course all these other as psychosis inducing components of cannabis in the hemp bill. So tell us about that crucible. I mean, there's a bit of a fight because you've been in the White House, you've been policy forming. No doubt you've had these many debates in the public square, and you've no doubt had a lot of grief by the bad actors in the sector. Tell us about that crucible and that win, in maybe some of the wins you've been having in this space.
Well, the reversal of the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, I think was a major victory.
That's the one. Yep.
And when it was passed, I remember sending a note around to some of my, contacts. We have email lists of all sorts of people who try to pass around information. And I said, this is just a cloaking device, using the Star Trek or Star Wars language.
Pop culture reference. Good, you go.
It's a cloaking device to develop intoxicating drugs that are going to be legal at the federal level. Because we have to remember marijuana in the United States is not legal at the federal level.
Correct. Yeah.
It's only state by state, which have chosen to approve it. And what the industry did was the lobbyists, the way it works in Washington is that lobbyists come in with little USB sticks. They go into people who sponsor bills, into senators or congressmen, the House representatives, and they say, here, insert this into this bill. And usually a staffer takes it and puts it in, and if nobody is conscientious, they don't read it and vet it carefully. And I just knew that this was going to happen. And what happened was a whole cannabidiol industry grew out of isolating CBD from hemp, which is, cannabidiol is not intoxicating.
Correct.
I think it's one of the world's greatest placebos, frankly.
It is. Well, that's another conversation for another day, but
that's another conversation.
Yeah.
People actually believe that it's a painkiller and it does 100 different things.
Yep. We've written on this. Yep.
Yes. But they also, because the hemp could not be grown at more than 0.3% THC, that doesn't mean anything with modern chemistry. Because you can isolate THC, which is 0.3% concentrated, and do whatever you want with it. You can make derivatives of it. You can make analogs of it, which is what they did.
Yep.
And they sold them legally in gas station outlets and in cigar stores, what have you, any outlet. And they were completely legal at the federal level, which is de facto legalized marijuana at the federal level.
That's right.
And young kids would go and buy them. There were no restrictions because this was a hemp extract. In one of my trips to Oklahoma, some of the farmers, some of the local people told me that the farmers built an entire fields of hemp, which looks a little different than cannabis sativa.
That's right.
Just, the leaves are a different shape.
Slightly different, yeah.
They built these gigantic fences of hemp, and inside they were growing pure marijuana, pure cannabis sativa.
Wow.
And of course, the inspectors would drive by and say, "Oh, these are just hemp fields."
Hemp plants. Oh, mate, you got to be kidding me. Wow.
So it was widely abused. Now, since the repeal, which just happened a few days ago, and I think SAM and CATCA, there's several organizations that put their mighty weight behind it with evidence, rock solid evidence. Since then, the pushback has been ferocious.
Yeah.
Ferocious. Senator Rand Paul, who's a physician, should know better. But he's
a libertarian, though. That's his problem. He's a libertarian. So, yeah.
He's a libertarian for which all his scientific training has been diluted by belief systems.
Correct. Yeah.
So he was very strongly against the repeal, but and the ferocious pushback has been shocking to me. But I think that with resolve, this will stay. It will stick.
No, it's good. Yeah, we follow that closely. Again, similar networks that we're involved with because we have a global partnership with lots of different actors, and we're part of the World Federation Against Drugs as well. So that's great. I'm glad to get your take on that because you were in the White House on this, and that was really important. Look, we're running out of time. I'm loving this conversation, but one of the last things I wanted to pick your brains on this and get your perspective, and you've sort of hinted at this earlier on. Excuse me. We, as we mentioned, we work closely with the recovery alumni for the purposes of engaging that human resource, the lived experience and earned resiliency to be prevention activists. And of course, the bad actors in the culture are constantly pushing back against that, saying you can't use ex-drug users, telling horror stories. They cherry pick certain data, spin it a certain way, and then try and silence some of the most profoundly potent tools that we have to bring prevention to the marketplace. But one of the things that we've been challenging for a while, and we've made this clear, the disease model of addiction, it's got a lot of traction for a lot of reasons. We've done the study on this and we know where it came from. And it's not an invalid label at all. But we've adopted a different position because we found that the bad actors love to wield the disease model as a fait accompli and therefore buy into all the apparatus that goes around, certain apparatus goes around helping people exit a disease model. We use the term biobehavioral disorder. Now, I wanted to pick your brains on that because the reason we picked that up is because it's one of the only non-communicable diseases, a bit like diabetes too, that can be stopped with a decision and a behavior change. Not always, but it can be. So that's why we've adopted that. And I'd like to get your take as a brain scientist on this because we see Carl Jung bought into this with his understanding of it. Of course, you've heard of contingency management. You've heard that tool?
Yes.
Paying meth users to stop using meth, and it works. What are your thoughts on that? Again, I'd just be interested to chime in
on addiction as a brain disease? Or?
Idea of.
I think that it is a biobehavioral disorder. And I think number one, most importantly, is that in some people, and especially in people who don't have a lot of weight on their brain, by that I mean They don't have personality disorders. They don't have social problems. They don't have employment issues. If they don't have a lot of these confounding factors, for them, being treated and walking away is actually not that difficult for most. It's as you stack more and more stressors on an individual that are internal as well as external, recovery is much more difficult. But recovery in many people is permanent.
Yes.
You know, they may crave, they may have relapses, but most people who recover and do walk away do very well. So it's obviously, if it's a biobehavioral disease, it is curable. That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, if it is, everything depends on how you define a disease.
Correct.
If you define a disease by having changes in the brain that are abnormal, that are quantifiable, that are measurable, that are in fact irreversible, and that causes a whole host of behavioral problems that interfere with survival, with normal living, then you can lean on it as a disease. Now, we have dozens and dozens of different ways in which drugs change the brain. We can find them by brain imaging using PET imaging, SPECT imaging, MRI imaging, diffusion tensor imaging, and so on. You can see these profound changes in the brain. You can also see them reverse when a person stops using in some cases.
Wow.
In other cases, the studies just haven't been done. You can give animals these drugs and you find I cannot even begin to describe the number of changes that we find using single cell transcriptomics and metabolomics and proteomics and all these modern technologies that look at everything instead of one simple pathway. The changes are massive.
Wow.
The big question is, how much of this affects behavior and how much of this is reversible? In the case of methamphetamine, which you've mentioned several times, we've done studies in our lab, and I'm trying to write it up and get it published, that shows that methamphetamine literally destroys certain nerve cells.
Wow.
That's toxicity. That's pure. That's not even a disease process. That's death of certain brain
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Pure death.
Yeah.
So there are drugs that do that. Alcohol will.
Yes.
Methamphetamine will at very high doses. Cocaine will change the vascularization of the brain to a point where parts of the brain simply don't get enough oxygen. Opioids will do that in an overdose. You cut the oxygen supply by slow breathing, by low heart rate, and 10,000 or 100,000 nerve cells are dead, and they will never come back again. So there's a whole gradient of changes in the brain, from cell biology, from receptor changes, from circuit changes, from cell death to behavior. And all of this at this point is a diffuse mass of observations that we still have to correlate with behavior in some cases. Some cases the imaging correlates beautifully with behavioral deficits, with cognitive deficits, and so on.
Of course. Wow, look, that you just opened up a can of worms there. I won't do it now, but that's probably another episode we could do at some point. Look, that is fascinating, because I think this is, again, the way the brain rewires, and we can talk about neuro-linguistic pathways and retraining the brain and all those kind of things that come into play outside in the therapy space. But that little insight, I think, is very helpful for a lot of our listeners who are in the space, but also didn't quite understand some of the dynamics of this. And I like the term brain death, because I would love to just
give you two pieces of data from our own lab that, besides this is on THC of marijuana. Two observations that we made, one which was published this year and one which is being written up now. We found, and we had never expected to find this, but we found that marijuana given to, this is preclinical research, we can't do this ethically in humans, but to adolescent non-human primates, we found that daily THC, and more kids are using daily now.
Yes.
At a moderate dose, there is a region of the brain called the amygdala, which is critical for mood, for affect, for depression, for suicidality, for sleep problems, for learning, memory, and it is implicated in psychosis and so on. That daily THC causes a profound inflammatory change in that brain area.
Wow.
We didn't find it in other brain areas that we looked.
That's significant.
That brain area is chock full of cannabinoid receptors.
Yes.
Also a critical area in terms of neurodevelopment and adolescent brain development. And we were stunned to see these data. In fact, I was so shocked at the first study that came out from these brains that I had it done in 3 different places, at MIT, at Harvard, and at the University of Toronto. And we all confirmed it, and that's when I felt comfortable publishing it.
Yeah. Wow.
The other thing we found is we did transcriptomics. In other words, we found what changes in gene expression this daily THC does. We found over 1,000 genes that were expressed differently with THC given daily to adolescents in the same brain area.
Wow. See, that's the epigenetic change. Wow.
So this is just a microcosm. There's a lot more coming out, but drugs do change your brain. That is a take-home message. And they change them in a way that can be very malevolent, especially in young adolescents and in youth.
Perfect way to end that conversation, guys. We're going to highlight that in some of our reels and make a real focus on that. Professor Madras, look, this has been outstanding, and like I said, we could go all day, and clearly you're a mine that we'd love to spelunk more and more. But before we go, there's a question we ask probably 95% of our guests, and it's a question about which do you think is preferable, one or both, or neither? The fence at the top of the cliff or the ambulance at the bottom when it comes to substance use in our society?
The most important thing that we have to do is prevention.
Yeah.
Period.
Defense.
And the most important defenses should start with parents.
Yeah, beautiful. Build fences with the family. Yeah, it's good.
Because we published a paper in 2019 showing that if parents use, their offspring are 3 times more likely to use. We have much more data than that have accumulated, which shows that if a parent says, no, you shouldn't use marijuana, the kids will not use marijuana and other drugs. That message does not extend to saying, I don't want you to smoke. If a parent says, I don't want you to smoke, the child may not smoke, but they'll still use marijuana. Marijuana appears to be the sort of barrier in a child's mind to using it as well as other drugs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another conversation as well, and I'm glad you brought that up, but we haven't got time today.
Yeah.
Professor Bertha Madras, look, this has been outstanding. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're an incredibly busy person. We are richer for this experience, and this podcast will go out the next couple of weeks, and we're going to encourage more and more people to engage with not just its content, but obviously your work and the work of which we will be promoting as well. So again, thank you once again for your taking the time. Absolutely outstanding. For those listening to us, please continue to subscribe, share the podcast with your networks. And until next time, let's avoid the unnecessary harm. Till then, bye.
Bye-bye.
As we wrap up today's session, remember, each step towards understanding is a step away from unnecessary harm. We're here to empower, inspire, and pave the way for optimal well-being. Stay resilient, stay informed, and continue being the change your community needs. Thank you for joining us at the Unnecessary Harm Podcast. Until next time, take care and keep pushing forward.